The most dangerous lie a woman can tell herself is that her sacrifice will be honoured by those who demanded it. England, 1814. The silence in the drawing room of Melford House was not peaceful. It was heavy, suffocating, and smelled faintly of stale brandy and old dust. It was the scent of decay, not of wood or fabric, but of a legacy crumbling in real time. Lady Clara Melford stood by the window, her back rigid, staring out at the grey London street, where rain was beginning to turn the cobblestones into slick, black mirrors. She was 26 years old, an age where the whispers of spinsterhood usually began to circle like vultures. But Clara had never had the luxury of worrying about marriage for love. She had spent the last 6 years worrying about survival. Behind her, the Viscount Melford, her father, was pacing. The sound of his boots on the worn Persian rug was erratic, betraying the trembling in his legs. He was a man who had been handsome once, before the gambling tables and the desperate loans had carved deep, anxious lines into his face. His cravat was loosely tied, a subtle sign of the unravelling that was happening to the man himself. "Clara," he said, his voice cracking on the name. "You must understand. There was no other way. The creditors were at the door this morning. Not the polite ones from the bank, Clara. The others. The ones who do not carry ledgers, but carry threats. They mentioned the horses first, then the furniture. Then they asked about you and Emily." Clara did not turn around immediately. She watched a carriage splash through a puddle below, mud spraying onto the sidewalk. She knew exactly how much they owed. She managed the household accounts, or what was left of them. She knew they had sold the silver 2 months ago. She knew the servants had not been paid in 3, but she had assumed there was still a floor to their fall. She had been wrong. The floor had rotted through, and they were staring into the abyss. "Who is it?" she asked, her voice calm, devoid of the panic that was fluttering in her throat like a trapped bird. "Who have you sold me to, father?" The Viscount stopped pacing. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. "The Duke of Calverton." Clara turned then. Her movement was slow, deliberate. The air seemed to leave the room. Calverton. The name carried weight in London, a weight made of gold and ice. Sebastian Vane. He was one of the wealthiest men in England, a peer of the realm whose influence reached into the very heart of Parliament. He was also a man known for a temperament so cold it could freeze wine in the glass. He was 32, unscarred by war, but seemingly hollowed out by something else entirely. The scandals of his mother, the late Duchess, were legendary. Stories of affairs and public humiliations that had destroyed his father. In response, Sebastian Vane had become a fortress. He was rigid, unyielding, and utterly devoid of warmth. "He offered for me?" Clara asked, scepticism lacing her tone. The Duke of Calverton could have any debutante in the season. He could have a girl of 18 with a dowry that rivaled the crown jewels. Why would he want the 26-year-old daughter of a ruined viscount? "He needs a wife who is sensible," her father muttered, unable to meet her gaze, fiddling with a button on his waistcoat. "He does not want a love match." He was quite specific. He wants a woman of breeding who understands duty and who will not cause him embarrassment. "He knows of your reputation, Clara. You are known for being pragmatic, for holding this family together while I struggled. While you gambled," Clara corrected gently, though the words were sharp enough to cut. "He is offering a settlement that will clear all our debts," the Viscount said, rushing the words now, desperate to justify the sale. "All of them, Clara. The house, the lands in Sussex, the creditors. We will be free. I can start again. I have a system now, a new way of playing at whites that cannot fail." Clara looked at her father, really looked at him. She saw the glint of relief in his watery eyes. But behind it, she saw the fever. If the Duke paid off the debts and gave him a lump sum, it would not mean a fresh start. It would mean a return to the tables. Within a year, perhaps 2, they would be back in this room, destitute again. But by then, she would be gone, locked away in some ducal estate, and there would be nothing left to sell. "And what of Emily?" Clara asked. Her father blinked, confused by the shift. "Emily? She is fine. She is upstairs. Emily is 18, Clara said, stepping away from the window. She is meant to debut next season. If you take this money, Father, how much of it will be set aside for her dowry? How much for her season? Or will she be sold next, to a lesser bidder, when the gold runs out again? Will you trade her to a merchant for a few more nights of baccarat? The Viscount flushed a deep, ugly red. That is unfair. I am doing this for both of you. I am saving this family. Clara closed her eyes for a brief moment. She thought of Emily, sweet, naive Emily, who still believed the world was full of poetry and romance. Emily, who sat upstairs mending old dresses and humming, oblivious to the fact that her future was being bartered. Clara had shielded her sister from the harsh truth of their poverty for years. She would not stop now. This was the final shield she could offer. I will do it, Clara said, opening her eyes. Her father let out a breath that was half sob, half laugh. Oh, thank God. Clara, you are a good daughter. You are... I will do it, Clara interrupted, her voice turning to steel. On one condition. Anything. The Duke is generous. He will... My condition is not for you, Father. It is for the Duke. I will not sign the marriage contract until I have spoken to his solicitors. Alone. Alone. That is highly irregular. Mr. Finch is a busy man. And the Duke... If the Duke wants a pragmatic wife, Clara said, smoothing her skirt with a hand that did not tremble, then he will appreciate a woman who reads the fine print. Arrange the meeting, Father, or tell the creditors to come back. The meeting took place 3 days later in the offices of Mr. Finch, the Duke's personal attorney. The room was intimidating, lined with leather-bound books that smelled of authority and old tobacco. Mr. Finch sat behind a massive mahogany desk, a man of dry ink and parchment, looking at Clara over the rim of his spectacles with mild annoyance. But he was not the problem. Standing by the fireplace, looking utterly out of place in the dusty office due to his sheer physical presence, was Sebastian Vane, the Duke of Calverton. Clara had seen him at balls from a distance. Up close, he was devastating. He was tall, his shoulders broad in a coat of impeccable tailoring that cost more than her father's entire estate. His hair was dark, swept back from a face that could have been carved from marble, high cheekbones, a strong jaw, and eyes of a piercing icy blue that seemed to assess her value and find it wanting. There were no scars on his skin, no physical marks of a difficult life, yet he held himself with a tension that suggested he was waiting for a blow. He radiated a profound, untouchable silence. He did not bow when she entered. He simply watched her. Lady Clara, Mr. Finch said, standing nervously. We were not expecting you to request a revision of the terms. His Grace has been exceedingly generous. The sum agreed upon with your father is... I am aware of the sum, Clara said, moving to the chair opposite the desk. She did not sit. She stood, gripping her reticule tightly to hide the trembling of her hands. She could feel the Duke's eyes on her, heavy and judgmental. He likely thought she was there to ask for more jewels, a larger allowance for pin money, a guarantee of a London season. Then what is the issue? The Duke spoke for the first time. His voice was deep, smooth, and utterly devoid of emotion. It was a voice used to giving orders that were instantly obeyed. It vibrated in the small room, commanding attention. The issue, Your Grace, is the destination of the funds, Clara said, turning to face him. She forced herself to hold his gaze. It was like looking into a winter storm. You are paying a bride price for me. My father intends to use it to clear his debts and, inevitably, to return to his gambling. He believes he has a new system. That is hardly my concern, Sebastian said coldly, leaning an arm against the mantel. I am purchasing a title's restoration and a wife. What the seller does with the coin is his business. I do not police the morality of those I do business with. It is my concern, Clara countered, her voice steady. Because I have a sister, Emily. She is 18. If my father squanders this money, she will be left with nothing. No dowry, no prospects, no future. She will be the daughter of a ruined man, with no one to protect her once I am gone from that house. I cannot leave her to that fate. Sebastian's expression did not change, but his eyes narrowed slightly. He tilted his head, studying her as one might study a biological specimen. "And what do you propose, Lady Clara?" Clara took a deep breath. This was it, the gamble. She placed a single sheet of paper on the lawyer's desk. "This is a draft for a trust fund. I want 80% of the payment you intended for my father to be diverted directly into this trust. It is to be irrevocable, managed by a trustee of your choosing, solely for the benefit of Miss Emily Melford. It will cover her education, her debut, and her dowry. My father is to have no access to it, not a penny." Mr. Finch gasped, his quill hovering in the air. "My lady, your father will never agree to this. The Viscount's debts are substantial. If we divert 80%, my father is desperate," Clara said flatly. "He will agree to whatever terms leave him with enough to keep the bailiffs away for a few months. He needs this marriage more than he needs the full sum. If you present this as a non-negotiable term from the Duke, he will sign. He is a coward, Mr. Finch. He will take what he can get." She turned back to Sebastian. "I am selling myself to you, Your Grace. I am aware of what I am. I am a transaction. All I ask is that the price of my life buys my sister's freedom, not my father's vices." The room went silent. The clock on the mantel ticked loudly, marking the seconds. Sebastian Vane looked at the woman standing before him. He had expected tears. He had expected greed. He had expected a woman who would try to charm him or manipulate him with feminine wiles. He despised such things. He despised the messy, emotional manipulation that had defined his mother's life. But this woman was different. She was selling herself with the cold calculation of a banker, yet the motive was entirely selfless. She was willing to enter a loveless marriage, to bind herself to a man known for his coldness, solely to ensure her sister did not suffer the same fate. She was trading her life for her sister's, and she was doing it without a single tear. Sebastian stepped forward, moving away from the fire. He stopped a few feet from her. He towered over her, but she did not flinch. He saw the intelligence in her eyes, the pragmatism that matched his own. She was not romantic. She was realistic. "Done," Sebastian said. Mr. Finch looked up, startled, his papers shuffling. "Your Grace, but the negotiations with the Viscount were—" "Draw up the papers, Finch. 80% to the girl's trust. The Viscount gets the rest to pay off the immediate wolves. If he refuses, the offer is withdrawn entirely. Tell him I have grown bored with his hesitation." Clara let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. Her knees felt weak, but she locked them. "Thank you, Your Grace." "Do not thank me," Sebastian said, his voice dropping lower, intimate and chilling. "This is a business arrangement. You have shown yourself to be a capable negotiator. That is a quality I value. I do not want a weeping willow for a wife, Lady Clara. I want a partner who understands the value of silence and order. I understand duty," she replied quietly. "Good. Then we are agreed. The wedding will be in 3 days. Do not be late." The wedding was a blur of grey silk and forced smiles. It was held in a small damp chapel on the outskirts of London, with only a few witnesses. There were no flowers, no music, no celebration. It was a merger, nothing more. Clara wore a dress that had been reworked from her mother's wardrobe, looking dignified but austere. Sebastian wore black, looking more like a man attending a funeral than a groom. When he placed the ring on her finger, his hand was dry and cool. He did not look at her face. He looked at the ring, ensuring it fit, ensuring the contract was sealed. Clara felt the weight of the gold band. It felt like a shackle. She glanced at her father, who stood in the corner, looking relieved and already mentally spending his 20%. Then she looked at Emily, who was weeping softly into a handkerchief, believing this to be a fairy tale romance. Clara forced a smile for her sister. "For you," she thought. "This is all for you." The ride to Calverton House, his massive London residence, was silent. They sat on opposite benches of the carriage, the rhythmic clatter of hooves filling the space between them. The rain had returned, drumming against the roof. Clara looked out the window, watching her old life disappear into the mist. She thought of the letter she had received from the bank confirming the trust. Emily was safe. The burden was lifted. But a new, heavier burden was settling on her shoulders. When they arrived, the house was imposing. It was a palace of stone, grand and beautiful, but utterly devoid of life. The windows were dark, save for a few flickering candles. The servants were lined up in the hall, their faces masks of professional indifference. Sebastian walked past them without a word, and Clara followed, the train of her dress whispering against the marble floor. He led her not to a shared suite, but to a set of private apartments in the east wing. He opened the door and gestured for her to enter. The room was exquisite, decorated in shades of pale blue and cream, filled with luxuries Clara had not known for years. A fire crackled in the grate, the only source of warmth in the entire house. But when she turned to face him, expecting perhaps a conversation about their arrangement or the awkwardness of the wedding night, she found him standing in the doorway, his hand on the latch. He did not enter. He stood on the threshold, a barrier between her and the rest of the world. "Your things have been brought up," he said, his eyes scanning the room as if checking for dust. Clara stood in the center of the room, feeling small. Is this where we are to stay?" "This is where you are to stay," he corrected, his tone flat. "My chambers are in the west wing." Clara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the drafty corridor. She understood that this was not a love match, but she had expected the basic conventions of marriage. They were husband and wife. There was an expectation of heirs, of a shared life, however formal. "The west wing," she repeated. "But surely—" Sebastian looked at her, and for a moment, the mask slipped. She saw a flash of something raw. Exhaustion, perhaps, or a deep-seated aversion. It wasn't hatred for her, but a rejection of what she represented. Intimacy, vulnerability, the messiness of human connection. "We need to understand the rules of this house, Clara," he said, stepping half a pace into the room, but refusing to close the distance between them. "I bought your hand to stop the whispers about my bachelorhood. I needed a duchess to manage the social obligations and to ensure the lineage eventually continues, but that is where your role ends." He took a breath, his posture rigid. "You have my title. You have my protection. You will have every comfort money can buy. You will never want for a dress or a carriage or a meal again, but I do not desire a real wife." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that you are invisible to me," he declared, the words precise and cruel, slicing through the air. "I do not want companionship. I do not want conversation at breakfast. I do not want to be asked about my day. And I certainly do not want emotional displays. You will run this house. You will attend the necessary functions by my side. And you will smile. But when the doors close, we are strangers." Clara stared at him. It was worse than she had imagined. He didn't just want a marriage of convenience. He wanted a phantom. He wanted her to exist only when the world was watching. "And heirs?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly, forcing the practical question. Sebastian's jaw tightened. He looked away, towards the darkness of the hallway. "When it is necessary, I will come to you. Until then, my door is locked. Do not knock. Do not bother me. And above all, Clara, do not create scandals. I have spent my life erasing the stain of my mother's lack of discretion. I will not tolerate a wife who draws attention to herself. Be perfect. Be silent. Be invisible." He looked back at her one last time. "Do you understand?" Clara swallowed the lump in her throat. She thought of Emily's trust fund. She thought of the freedom she had bought. "I understand, Your Grace." "Good." He stepped back and closed the door. The click of the latch echoed in the silence of the room. It sounded like a cell door slamming shut. Clara stood there for a long time. She looked at the fire, then at the empty bed that was too large for one person. She touched the silk of the curtains, feeling the wealth that surrounded her. She had saved Emily. She had secured her family's future. She was a duchess. She had everything a woman was supposed to want. And she was completely alone. The first few days in Calverton House were a lesson in isolation. Clara woke early, dressed by a maid who was polite but distant, and wandered the vast, empty halls. The house was beautiful, filled with art and history, but it felt like a museum, not a home. She attempted to join Sebastian for breakfast the morning after the wedding. When she entered the dining room, he was already there, hidden behind a newspaper. He did not lower it. He did not greet her. He did not acknowledge the sound of her chair being pulled out. "Good morning," she said, testing the waters. Silence. The turn of a page. Clara poured her own tea. She buttered a piece of toast, the scraping of the knife sounding deafeningly loud. She looked at him, at the wall of newsprint that separated them. He was keeping his word. To him, she was not there. She was a ghost haunting his periphery. She ate quickly and left. By the end of the week, Clara had learned the geography of her new life. The East Wing was her domain. The West Wing was forbidden territory. The library was his sanctuary. The drawing rooms were neutral ground, to be used only when guests were present, which they were not. She began to take meals in her room. It was easier than facing the silent wall of his indifference. She wrote to Emily, describing a husband who was very busy with affairs of state, and a house that was grand and peaceful. She lied with ink and paper, painting a picture of contentment, while the silence of Calverton House pressed against her eardrums. She walked the gardens alone, the grey London sky matching her mood. She watched the servants scurrying about, avoiding her gaze. They took their cues from the master. If the Duke did not see her, why should they? Clara realised then the full extent of the price she had paid. She had not just sold her hand, she had sold her voice. She had agreed to be erased. She stopped in front of a rose bush, its blooms withered by the coming winter. She reached out and crushed a dead petal between her fingers. "Invisible," she whispered to the wind. "Very well, Sebastian. If you want invisible, I shall be the most invisible Duchess this city has ever seen." She turned back towards the looming stone house, her face set in a mask of calm determination. She would survive this. She would find a way to live in the shadows he had cast. But as she crossed the threshold, the cold air of the hallway wrapped around her, a constant reminder that winter had come to stay. 6 months had passed since Clara Melford became the Duchess of Calverton, and in that time, she had mastered the art of becoming a ghost. The great house in Mayfair, with its towering stone facade and echoing corridors, had absorbed her into its quiet rhythm. She moved through the rooms like a draught of air, felt but rarely seen, her presence marked only by the sudden, miraculous order that had descended upon the household. It was a Tuesday morning, grey and drizzling, the kind of London weather that seemed to seep into the very bones of the city. Clara sat in the small morning room she had claimed as her office. It was tucked away in the East Wing, far from Sebastian's sanctuary in the library. The desk before her was covered in ledgers, receipts, and correspondence from the tenant farmers on the Duke's country estates. Mr. Henderson, the estate steward, stood before her, clutching his ledger, his hands still marked by a nervous energy that had noticeably smoothed out over the last few months. "Your Grace," Henderson said, his voice lowered in reverence. "The suppliers accepted the revised quote you suggested. We saved nearly £200 on materials alone." Clara dipped her pen in the inkwell, her movements precise. "Good." She did not look up from the figures. "And the dispute regarding the tenant in the cottage near the mill?" "Settled, Your Grace. When I explained that the rent would be deferred for a fortnight if he agreed to repair the fencing himself, he wept. He has promised to do the work in exchange." Clara finally looked up. Her eyes, a cool, intelligent grey, met his. "Compassion is not weakness, Mr. Henderson. The Duke's lands must be productive, and fear is a poor fertilizer." "Of course, Your Grace." The steward hesitated. Shall I inform His Grace of these successes? The quarterly report is due on his desk tomorrow." Clara's expression tightened imperceptibly. "No. Place the report on his desk. He will see that the accounts are healthy, and that is all he requires." "But, Your Grace, surely he would wish to know that his wife is—" "He wishes for silence, Mr. Henderson," Clara cut in, her voice so soft it was final. "As long as I do not appear at his door, He is satisfied. Let us not disturb his satisfaction. The steward bowed, defeated by her resolve. As you wish, your grace. When he left, Clara remained alone in the room. She leaned back in her chair and exhaled a breath she had been holding. This was her life now. She was the invisible hand that kept the house of Calverton from crumbling. She managed the London staff, settling disputes between the cook and the butler before they became arguments. She reviewed the menus, ensuring Sebastian's favourite dishes appeared without him ever having to ask. She audited the bills, cutting out the waste that had accumulated during his bachelor years. She was the perfect Duchess, efficient, silent, invisible. And Sebastian noticed none of it. To him, the fact that the house was warm, the dinners excellent, and the accounts flourishing was simply the natural order of things. He assumed, in his arrogance, that the world simply bent to his will. He did not see the woman working until midnight by candlelight to ensure it did so. They lived parallel lives, two lines that never intersected. They met only at the necessary social functions, standing side by side in receiving lines, stiff and formal. He would introduce her. My wife, the Duchess, with the same tone one might use to introduce a piece of expensive statuary. She would smile, curtsy, and say nothing of substance. Then they would return to the carriage, and the silence would descend again, thick and impenetrable. Clara stood up and walked to the window. The rain was heavier now, blurring the glass. She felt a familiar ache in her chest, the hollow feeling of being unseen. It was not that she craved his affection. She had given up on that notion before the wedding. But she craved his respect. She craved acknowledgement that she was a person, a mind, a force, and not just a decorative object bought to fill a vacancy. She reached into the pocket of her dress and pulled out a letter. The paper was worn soft from how many times she had unfolded it. It was from Emily. Dearest Clara, you will not believe the news. I have been moved to the advanced French class. Madame Leblanc says my accent is passable, which for her is high praise indeed. The school is wonderful, Clara. We have music lessons every afternoon, and on Sundays we walk in the gardens. I have made a friend, Sarah, whose brother is in the Navy. She tells the most frightful stories about the sea. I miss you terribly, of course. I hope you are happy in your grand house. I imagine you wearing silk every day and eating cakes for breakfast. Does the Duke treat you like a princess? I tell everyone my sister is a Duchess, and they all swoon. Write to me soon. Your loving sister, Emily. Clara pressed the letter to her chest. This was why. Every moment of loneliness, every slight, every cold shoulder. It was the price of Emily's joy. Emily was safe. Emily was learning French and walking in gardens, far away from the shadow of their father's debts. As long as Emily was happy, Clara could endure the silence. She could endure being a ghost. A clock chimed in the hallway. 2 o'clock. Sebastian would be at Parliament. He had been agitated for weeks, working on a complex bill regarding agricultural imports. The house had been walking on eggshells around his mood. Clara decided to go to the library. It was forbidden territory when he was home, but when he was out, she sometimes slipped in to borrow a book. The library was the only room in the house that felt alive to her, filled with the smell of old paper and leather, the scent of knowledge. She opened the heavy oak doors and stepped inside. The room was vast, lined from floor to ceiling with books. A fire had died down in the grate, leaving a bed of glowing embers. Sebastian's desk was a chaotic island in the centre of the room, piled high with stacks of parchment, legal texts, and government reports. Clara moved towards the shelves on the far wall, intending to find a volume of history she had spotted last week. But as she passed the desk, something caught her eye. It was the draft of his speech. It lay open, the ink still relatively fresh, covered in Sebastian's sharp, angular handwriting. The title was bold: A Proposal for the Adjustment of Grain Tariffs and the Stabilization of Domestic Yields. Clara knew of this bill. It was controversial. The landed gentry wanted high tariffs to protect their profits. The manufacturers wanted low tariffs to feed their workers cheaply. Sebastian was attempting to find a middle ground, a mathematical argument that would prove stability was more profitable than protectionism. Curiosity got the better of her. She stepped closer. She knew she shouldn't. The rule was clear. Do not bother him. Do not interfere. But the paper called to her. She leaned over and began to read. It was a brilliant argument, rhetorically. Sebastian was a gifted speaker. His words were commanding and persuasive. But as she read on, her eyes narrowed. She reached the third page, where the core statistical argument lay. He was using a projection of wheat yields from the previous decade to forecast the impact of the tariff reduction. She frowned. The numbers didn't look right. Clara had spent 6 years managing her father's failing estates. She knew the price of wheat better than she knew the price of silk. She knew the yields of 1809 and 1810 had been disastrous due to the blight, skewing the 10-year average. If one included those years without adjusting for the anomaly, the projected revenue for the next 5 years would be inflated by nearly 15%. She looked at Sebastian's calculation in the margin. He had not adjusted. He had taken the raw average. If he presented this to the House of Lords, the opposition, men who owned thousands of acres and knew their yields down to the bushel, would tear him apart. They would spot the error in seconds. They would accuse him of inflating the numbers to support his argument. He would be humiliated. The Ice Duke would be made to look like an incompetent amateur. Clara's heart began to race. She looked at the door. He could return at any moment. She should leave. Let him make the mistake. Let him suffer the consequences of his arrogance. Why should she save him? He treated her like furniture, but then she thought of the name she now bore, Duchess of Calverton. His humiliation was her humiliation, and more than that, it was simply wrong. The error offended her sense of order. It was a chaotic blemish on a logical argument. She made a decision. She picked up a quill from the tray. The nib was sharp. She dipped it into the inkwell, her hand hovering over the pristine document. With a light, steady touch, she drew a line through the erroneous calculation. In the margin, in her neat, flowing script, she wrote, "Correction. The yields of 1809 to 10 must be weighted for the blight anomaly. The true 10-year adjusted average is 14.2 bushels per acre, not 16.5. The projected revenue decrease is therefore 8%, not negligible." She added a quick reference to the Agricultural Board's report of 1811 to support the correction. She blew gently on the ink to dry it, placed the quill back exactly where she had found it, and fled the room. Her heart was pounding against her ribs as if she had committed a crime. In a way, in this house, she had. She had dared to be visible. When Sebastian returned that evening, the rain had turned into a torrential downpour. He entered the house shaking water from his greatcoat, his mood foul. The debate in the committee had gone poorly, and he was exhausted. He wanted nothing more than a brandy and silence. He nodded to the butler, ignored the footman, and walked straight to the library. He needed to finish the speech tonight. It was to be presented tomorrow. He poured himself a glass of amber liquid, drank it in one swallow, and sat at his desk. He rubbed his temples, trying to banish the headache that had been plaguing him all day. He pulled the speech toward him. He read the first page. Fine. The second. Good. He turned to the third page. He froze. There, in the margin, was ink that was not his. He stared at it, uncomprehending. Someone had written on his work. Someone had crossed out his figures. He read the note. The yields of 1809 to 10 must be weighted. He did the mental math. He checked the reference book on the shelf behind him. The blood drained from his face, replaced by a flush of hot, sudden anger. The correction was right. He had been wrong, crucially, dangerously wrong. If he had said those numbers tomorrow, Lord Liverpool would have laughed him out of the chamber. He should have felt relief. A rational man would have felt relief. But Sebastian Vane was not feeling rational. He was feeling violated. This was his sanctum, his private mind. Someone had invaded it. Someone had looked at his work, judged it, and found it wanting, and he knew exactly who it was. There was only one other person in this house with the education and the audacity to read a parliamentary bill. He stood up. the chair scraping violently against the floor. He grabbed the paper and marched out of the library. Clara was in her sitting room in the East Wing, reading a book of poetry she didn't enjoy, trying to calm her nerves. When the door burst open, she didn't jump, but her hands tightened on the book covers. Sebastian stood in the doorway. He was still wearing his damp clothes from the street. His hair was slightly disheveled. He looked wild and furious. "You," he said. It wasn't a greeting. It was an accusation. He walked into the room and slammed the paper down on the small tea table in front of her. "Did you write this?" Clara looked at the paper, then up at him. She saw the anger in his eyes, the cold, defensive fury of a man whose armor has been scratched. "Yes," she said calmly. "I did." "You entered my library," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You went through my papers." "I went in to borrow a book," Clara corrected. "The speech was open on your desk." I glanced at it. The error was glaring, Sebastian. You were using raw averages for a blight decade. It would have ruined your argument. "And you thought it your place to correct me?" he snapped. "You thought, here is the Duke, clearly incapable of basic arithmetic. Let me step in like a schoolmistress and mark his work. I thought, here is my husband, about to walk into a trap," Clara said, her voice rising slightly. "I saved you from embarrassment. You should be thanking me." "Thanking you," he laughed, a short, harsh sound. "For invading my privacy? For proving that you cannot follow the one simple instruction I gave you? I told you to leave me alone. I told you I did not want a partner. I did not want a critic in my own home." "I am not a critic." Clara stood up, facing him. "I am an intelligent woman. Is that what frightens you so much? That I have a mind? That I might actually understand the work you do?" Sebastian stepped closer, looming over her. "What frightens me," he hissed, "is a wife who does not know her place. I do not care about your intelligence, Clara. I do not care if you can recite the classics or calculate the trajectory of the moon. I married you to run this house and to provide heirs. I did not marry you to act as my political advisor." "You married a human being!" Clara cried out, the frustration of 6 months boiling over. "I have spent 6 months being a ghost for you. I manage your estates, I fix your accounts, I make sure your life is perfect and seamless, and you don't even see it. You think the food appears by magic. You think the tenants are happy by accident. That is me, Sebastian. That is my intelligence working for you every single day." Sebastian stopped. The revelation hung in the air. He looked at her, really looked at her, and for a second, Clara saw a flicker of something else in his eyes. Shame, perhaps. Surprise. But he crushed it instantly. He rebuilt the wall. "I did not ask you to do any of that," he said, his voice turning icy cold again. "If you have been playing steward, that is your choice. But do not expect applause for doing what a duchess ought to do, and do not ever," he pointed a finger at her, "touch my papers again. If I want your opinion, I will ask for it, and I will never ask for it." He snatched the paper from the table. "Stay in your wing, Clara, and keep your cleverness to yourself. It holds no interest for me. It is unbecoming." He turned and walked out, leaving the door wide open. Clara stood there, trembling. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a cold, hard pit in her stomach. He had not just rejected her help. He had rejected her. He had looked at the best part of her, her mind, her competence, her care, and called it unbecoming. He didn't just want her invisible. He wanted her diminished. He wanted her to be less than she was, so that he could feel safe in his isolated fortress. She sank back onto the sofa. Tears pricked her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had shed enough tears for Sebastian Vane. "Unbecoming," she whispered to the empty room. "He thinks me unbecoming." She looked at the open door. The hallway was dark. He wanted her to be a prop, a background character in the play of his life. "No," she said. The word was soft, but it had the weight of iron. She stood up and walked to the mirror over the fireplace. She looked at her reflection. She was pale. She was wearing a dress of dove grey, high-necked and modest. It was the colour of rain, the colour of shadows. the color of a woman trying to disappear. No more. She turned away from the mirror and walked to her writing desk. There was a silver tray where the morning's post was kept. On top of the pile sat an envelope she had ignored earlier, thinking it just another social obligation she would attend as a ghost. She picked it up. It was thick, creamy cardstock with a gold seal. The annual ball of Lady Halloway. It was the premier event of the winter season. The entire peerage would be there. Sebastian usually attended for an hour, spoke to the necessary ministers, and then dragged her home before the dancing began. He always wore black. She always wore pale blue or grey. They were the spectral couple, haunting the edges of the ballroom. Clara tapped the invitation against her palm. He had said her intelligence held no interest for him. He had said he didn't want a partner. He had treated her attempt to connect as an invasion. Very well. If he would not see her when she was helpful, when she was kind, when she was quiet, then he would be forced to see her when she was undeniable. She sat down at the desk. She pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. She dipped her pen in the ink. She did not write to Emily this time. She wrote to the most exclusive, expensive, and daring modiste on Bond Street. Madame St. Clair. Madame, I require a gown for the Halloway ball. It must be ready in 3 weeks. Clara paused. She looked down at her grey dress. She hated it. She hated the safety of it. I do not want grey, she wrote, the quill scratching loudly in the silence. I do not want pastels. I do not want modesty. I want green, emerald green, deep, vibrant, and dangerous. I want silk that catches the light. I want a neckline that adheres to the latest fashion, not the most conservative. She imagined Sebastian's face. She imagined him walking into the ballroom and looking for his invisible wife in the shadows and not finding her. She imagined him having to look for her in the light. Make me a dress that cannot be ignored, she wrote. She signed her name with a flourish that she hadn't used since she was a girl, before the debts, before the ruin. Her Grace, the Duchess of Calverton. She sanded the ink and rang the bell for the maid. When the girl appeared, looking sleepy and confused, Clara held out the letter. Have this delivered to Bond Street first thing in the morning, Clara said. Her voice was not the soft whisper of the ghost anymore. It was clear. It was firm. Yes, Your Grace. And tell the cook, Clara added, that from tomorrow I will be taking my breakfast in the dining room, at the table. The maid curtsied, eyes wide. Yes, Your Grace. Clara turned back to the window. The rain was still falling, but she didn't feel the chill anymore. She felt a fire kindling in her chest, a slow-burning flame of rebellion. Sebastian Vane had demanded a wife who was invisible. He was about to learn that invisibility was a choice, and she was done choosing it. The ghost was dead. The woman was waking up. The carriage door slammed shut, sealing them inside a box of velvet and suffocating darkness. The sound echoed like a gunshot, marking the end of the public performance and the beginning of the private war. Outside, the London rain lashed against the lacquered wood, a rhythmic drumming that did nothing to drown out the ragged sound of Sebastian's breathing. He sat on the opposite bench, a shadow among shadows. The passing street lamps sliced through the cabin at intervals, illuminating his face in strobe-light flashes. He looked like a statue cracked down the centre, rigid, pale, but vibrating with a suppressed violence that terrified and exhilarated Clara in equal measure. Clara pressed herself into the corner of the carriage, her emerald dress rustling loudly in the small space. The silk, which had felt like armour in the ballroom, now felt like a target. She could feel his eyes on her, heavy and searing, stripping away the layers of her composure. You have a great deal to say for yourself, I imagine, Sebastian said finally. His voice was low, a jagged whisper that scraped against the silence. Clara gripped her reticule until her knuckles turned white. I have nothing to say, Your Grace. I believe your actions in the ballroom spoke loudly enough for both of us. My actions? Sebastian let out a harsh, incredulous laugh. He leaned forward, the leather of his gloves creaking as he clenched his fists on his knees. You stand there, half naked in a dress designed for a courtesan, laughing in the arms of a man who has been lusting after you since the moment he arrived, and you dare to question my actions. I was dancing, Sebastian, Clara snapped, the injustice of it overriding her fear. It was a waltz. It is a dance performed in every ballroom in Europe. And the dress is the height of fashion, as you would know if you ever looked at a woman who wasn't a statue in a museum. I look at you, he snarled. And tonight everyone looked at you. Do you have any idea of the spectacle you created? The Duchess of Calverton, throwing her head back and braying like a common milkmaid while Captain Stirling pawed at her waist. He did not paw, Clara cried. He held me with respect. He spoke to me with respect. He asked me what I was reading. He asked me how I was. He treated me like a human being, which is more than you have done in 6 months. He was undressing you with his eyes, Clara. Are you so desperate for attention that you cannot tell the difference between courtesy and predation? I am desperate for existence, she shouted back. The carriage lurched as it took a corner too fast, throwing her shoulder against the padded wall. She used the momentum to lean forward, closing the distance between them. You want to talk about desperation? Look at yourself. You are shaking with rage because another man smiled at me. Why? Sebastian stared at her, his jaw working. Because you are my wife. Because you bear my name. No, Clara said, her voice dropping to a terrifying calm. That is not enough. You have made it very clear that being your wife is a title, not a relationship. You told me on our wedding night that I was invisible to you. Do you remember? Clara, you said, you are invisible to me. I do not desire a real wife. Those were your words, Sebastian. You built this wall. You demanded this silence. She stared directly into his eyes, her gaze unflinching. So answer me this. If I do not exist to you, why does it matter if I exist to Captain Stirling? The question hung in the air, sharp and unanswerable. Sebastian opened his mouth to retort, to summon the icy logic that usually served him so well, but he found nothing. His mind was a chaotic storm. He wanted to say that she was his property, but that sounded barbaric. He wanted to say he cared for her reputation, but he knew that wasn't the truth. The truth was, seeing her in Stirling's arms had felt like a physical amputation. The truth was, when she laughed for that soldier, Sebastian had felt a jealousy so primitive it made him want to burn the world down just to ensure she never looked at anyone else again. It matters, he grit out, his voice thick. Because you are mine. I am not a possession you can put in a cupboard and ignore until someone else tries to steal it, Clara retorted. You cannot hoard a person, Sebastian. You cannot demand my loyalty while giving me nothing but your coldness. You are a hypocrite. I am a man protecting what is his. You are a dog in the manger, Clara screamed, losing all control. You don't want the hay, but you won't let the horse eat it either. You want me dead and buried in your house, a ghost who runs your accounts and warms your house but never troubles your heart. Well, I am not dead. I am alive, and tonight I felt alive, and you hate me for it because it reminds you that you are dead inside. Enough, Sebastian roared. He lunged across the carriage. He didn't strike her. He would never strike a woman, but he grabbed her shoulders, pinning her against the velvet squabs. His face was inches from hers. She could feel the heat radiating from him, smell the brandy on his breath mixed with the scent of rain and fury. For a moment, neither of them moved. The carriage rattled on, but the world had narrowed down to the space between their bodies. Clara looked up at him, her chest heaving. She saw the rage in his eyes, but beneath it she saw something else. Hunger, panic, a desperate, terrifying need. You are not invisible, he whispered, the words sounding like a confession torn from his throat. God help me. You are the most visible thing in my world. Clara's breath hitched. She waited for him to kiss her. The tension was so thick it was almost painful. She could feel his fingers digging into her bare shoulders, his gaze dropping to her lips. Part of her, the treacherous part that had been starved of touch, wanted him to close the gap, but the carriage ground to a halt. The sudden stop threw them off balance. Sebastian pulled back, the spell breaking as reality intruded. The footman was opening the door. They were home. Sebastian released her abruptly, as if her skin had burned him. He scrambled out of the carriage without waiting for the step to be lowered, turning his back on her to bark orders at the startled servants. "Clear the hall. Everyone to their quarters. Now!" Clara climbed out slowly. Her legs were trembling. She walked up the steps, her head held high, though she felt like she was walking to the gallows. She passed Sebastian in the doorway. He didn't look at her. He was staring at the floor, his chest rising and falling rapidly. She walked to the stairs. She needed to get to her room. She needed to lock the door and hide until the morning. But as she reached the landing, she heard heavy footsteps behind her. She didn't turn. She quickened her pace. She reached the corridor of the east wing. The footsteps matched her speed. "Clara." She ignored him. She reached her door and reached for the handle. Sebastian's hand slammed flat against the wood, holding the door shut. Clara spun around, her back pressed against the paneling. Sebastian stood over her, looming large in the dimly lit hallway. The mask of the Duke was gone completely now. He looked wild. "Open it," he said. "Why?" Clara demanded, her voice shaking. "So you can yell at me more? So you can list my failures as a duchess? I am tired, Sebastian. Leave me alone. I cannot." He stepped closer, crowding her space. "We are not finished. We are finished for tonight," she said, trying to reach for the handle again. He caught her wrist. His grip was firm, not painful, but inescapable. "You called me a hypocrite. You called me dead inside. You think you can throw those words at me and then simply go to sleep? I think you proved me right," Clara said, finding her courage in the wreckage of her dignity. "Look at you. You are chasing me down a hallway because your pride is wounded." "It is not my pride that is the problem," he growled. He used his free hand to cup her face, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. His touch was rough, calloused, and confusingly tender. "It is the fact that I cannot get the image of you with him out of my head. I want to scour it away." "And how do you propose to do that?" Clara whispered. "By reminding you who you belong to." He leaned down. This time, there was no carriage stopping him. He kissed her. It was a collision. There was no gentleness in it, no romance. It was a claiming. His mouth was hard on hers, demanding a response. He pressed his body against hers, trapping her between his heat and the hard wood of the door. Clara gasped, and he used the opportunity to deepen the kiss. For a second, just one terrible, beautiful second, Clara melted. Her body recognized him. Her loneliness rose up to meet him. She wanted to be held. She wanted to be wanted. But then his hand slid down her back, gripping the silk of the dress, pulling her hips against his. It felt like ownership. It felt like he was stamping a brand on cattle. He didn't love her. He didn't even like her. He was just a man marking his territory because another predator had circled it. The realization turned her blood to ice. She placed her hands on his chest and shoved. He didn't move. She turned her head, breaking the kiss. "No!" she cried. Sebastian froze. He was breathing hard, his forehead resting against the doorframe next to her head. "Clara!" "Get off me," she hissed. "Do not touch me." He pulled back slowly, looking at her with dazed, darkened eyes. "You are my wife." "I am a person!" Clara shouted, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. "I am not a soothing balm for your ego. You do not get to ignore me for 6 months and then decide you want me just because you are jealous. That is not desire, Sebastian. That is panic." Sebastian straightened. The rejection hit him hard, cooling the fever in his blood. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the disgust in her eyes. It wounded him more than he expected. "I am not panic-stricken," he said coldly, trying to regain his dignity. "You are," she said, her voice dripping with pity. "You are terrified. You are a small man, Sebastian. You play at being a great duke, but you are afraid of a real woman. You are afraid of real feelings. You want a doll you can put on a shelf, and when the doll talks back, you don't know what to do. Be careful, Clara. Or what? You'll send me away? You'll stop speaking to me. You already do those things." She grabbed the handle and shoved the door open. She stepped inside and turned back to face him. Go back to your library. Go back to your numbers. They are the only things that don't frighten you. She slammed the door in his face. Sebastian stood there as the lock clicked. Then the bolt slid home. He stared at the wood grain, his hand half raised. He could break the door down. He had the right. He was the master of this house, but the words echoed in his skull. Small man, dead inside, hypocrite. He lowered his hand. A wave of exhaustion crashed over him, extinguishing the anger and leaving only a bleak grey ash. She was right. He had acted like a brute. He had lost control, and for Sebastian Vane, the loss of control was the ultimate sin. He turned and walked away. The corridor was silent, but it felt like the silence of a graveyard. Sebastian did not sleep. He paced the length of his study until the carpet threatened to wear thin. He drank brandy, but it tasted like water. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw it. The ballroom, the captain, the laughter. He couldn't stay in London. The realization crystallized as the dawn began to bleed grey light through the curtains. London was a variable he could not control. Stirling was here. The season was filled with parties, with temptations, with opportunities for Clara to exist in ways that tormented him. If they stayed, he would have to watch her drift further away. He would have to watch her become the woman in the emerald dress every night. He would have to fight the urge to challenge every man who looked at her. He would become his father, a man destroyed by his wife's public life. He couldn't do it. He wasn't strong enough. He needed to reset the board. He needed to take the pieces back to a place where the rules were simple. He stopped pacing. He looked at the map of England on the wall. His eyes travelled north. Yorkshire, Calverton Manor. It was isolated. It was rugged. It was hours from the nearest neighbour. There were no ballrooms, no officers in red coats, just the moors, the wind, and the house. There, he could find his balance. There, Clara would have no audience but him. Perhaps in the silence of the north he could figure out what to do with this woman who had suddenly become so dangerously real. Or perhaps he just wanted to hide her, where no one else could see her. He didn't care about the distinction. He rang the bell. The butler appeared, looking sleepy and dishevelled. "Your Grace, prepare the household," Sebastian said, his voice hoarse but steady. "We are leaving." "Leaving, sir, for the day?" "For the season. We are going to Yorkshire." The butler's eyes widened. "Yorkshire? But Your Grace, the manor is... It has not been prepared. And the Duchess..." "The Duchess will be ready," Sebastian said. "We leave at noon. Pack everything." Clara woke to a pounding on her door. She had fallen asleep in the armchair, still wearing her shift, wrapped in a blanket. Her head throbbed. "Come in," she croaked, then remembered the bolt. She stood up, her legs stiff, and unlocked the door. It was her maid, Sarah. The girl looked frantic. "Your Grace! Oh, thank goodness you are awake. The master is in a state." "What is happening?" Clara asked, rubbing her temples. "We are packing, Your Grace. Everything. Trunks, boxes, linens." Clara frowned. "Packing? Why?" "His Grace has ordered it. We are leaving London. Today." Clara froze. "Leaving? For where?" "Yorkshire, Your Grace. Calverton Manor." Clara walked to the window. She pulled back the curtain and looked down at the street. Below, the household was in chaos. Servants were loading trunks onto the heavy travelling carriage. Horses were being harnessed. It looked like a military evacuation. She let out a short, bitter laugh. "He is running away," she whispered. It was so perfectly, pitifully Sebastian. He had faced a moment of real emotion, a moment of conflict, and his response was to retreat. He couldn't control London, so he was removing them from it. He was taking her to the ends of the earth, to keep her away from temptation, or perhaps to punish her. She turned back to Sarah. "Start packing the warm dresses, Sarah. All of them. And my books. You are not going to argue with him, Your Grace." "No," Clara said. She walked to the wash basin and splashed cold water on her face. She looked at her reflection. She looked tired, but the fire from last night hadn't gone out. It had just settled into something harder. Let him run, she said softly. Let him drag us to the top of a mountain. He forgets one thing. What is that, Your Grace? That I am already there with him. The departure was a grim affair. The sky was still weeping rain over London as the carriage pulled up to the front steps. Sebastian stood by the door, checking his pocket watch. He looked immaculate, his cravat perfect, his face a mask of bored indifference. But Clara could see the tension in his shoulders. He looked like a man expecting an ambush. Clara descended the stairs. She wore a heavy grey travelling habit, a bonnet obscuring her face. She looked like the ghost he had ordered her to be 6 months ago, but as she reached him, she stopped. She didn't curtsy. She looked him straight in the eye. Yorkshire, she said. It wasn't a question. The country air will be beneficial, Sebastian said, not meeting her gaze. London has become stifling. You mean I have become difficult, Clara corrected. I mean that I desire peace, he said sharply, and I cannot find it here. You won't find it there either, Clara said, because you are taking yourself with you. Sebastian's jaw tightened. Get in the carriage, Clara. She climbed in. He followed. The door shut, cutting off the sounds of the city. The carriage lurched forward. Clara leaned back against the cushions, closing her eyes. She imagined Arthur Sterling's face when he heard they had gone. He would know. He would understand that the Duke had fled the field. But she wasn't Arthur's to save. She was Sebastian's wife, bound by law and contract. She looked across at her husband. He had already pulled out a sheaf of papers, pretending to read. He was building his wall again, brick by paper brick. Let him try, Clara thought. Let him try to ignore me in a house isolated by miles of moorland. In London, he could hide in Parliament. In Yorkshire, there will be nowhere to hide. The carriage rattled over the bridge, leaving the city behind. The road to the north stretched out before them, long, winding, and treacherous. They were two enemies trapped in a box, heading into the wilderness. And Clara had a feeling that the silence Sebastian prized so much was about to be broken for good. Yorkshire, 1814. The landscape of the north was a bruise on the face of England, purple with heather, grey with slate, and battered by a wind that seemed to have a personal vendetta against anything standing upright. Calverton Manor rose from this desolation like a fortress of blackened stone, a grim sentinel watching over miles of empty moorland. It was a house built for sieges, not for balls. Sebastian stood in the window of his study, looking out at the rolling fog. For the first time in a week, his shoulders felt loose. The silence here was absolute. There were no carriages rattling over cobblestones, no whispers behind fans, and most importantly, no scarlet uniforms. He had won. It was a retreat, yes, but a strategic one. He had extracted Clara from the poisonous atmosphere of London and placed her here, where the only audience for her rebellion was the sheep and the servants. Here, the madness of the ballroom would fade. She would forget the captain. She would forget her anger. They would return to the equilibrium of silence and order. He turned back to his desk. It was time to work. He had a letter to write to his steward in London. The door opened. It was Higgins, the elderly butler who came with the house, a man who moved with the slow, creaking dignity of a glacier. Your Grace, Higgins wheezed. A visitor. Sebastian frowned. A visitor? We have been here 2 days. Who knows we are in residence? He said he saw the smoke from the chimneys, Your Grace, and he wished to pay his respects to his new neighbours. Send him away, Sebastian said, waving a hand. Tell him we are not receiving. I came here for privacy, Higgins. He was quite insistent, sir, and as he is the owner of the adjoining estate... Sebastian paused. A neighbour. He had forgotten there were other landowners in this godforsaken district. It would be poor form to snub a man whose fences bordered his own. Politics followed him even here. Very well, Sebastian sighed. Show him into the drawing room. I will come down shortly. Who is it? Lord Gillingham, Squire Thorne. No, sir, Higgins said. It is Captain Sterling. The name hung in the air for a second, refusing to register. It was a nonsense sound, an impossibility. Who? Sebastian asked, his voice flat. Captain Arthur Stirling, sir, of Oakwood Hall, the estate to the east. Sebastian felt the blood drain from his face, leaving him cold and light-headed. It was a cosmic joke, a divine punishment. He had fled hundreds of miles to escape one man, only to land on his doorstep. Stirling, Sebastian repeated. He lives here. His family has held Oakwood for generations, sir. Sebastian gripped the edge of his desk. The wood bit into his palm. He had dragged Clara across the country, endured days of sulking silence in a carriage, only to deliver her directly into the lion's den. Where is the Duchess? He asked sharply. Her Grace is already in the drawing room, sir. She was taking tea when the captain arrived. Sebastian didn't wait for the rest. He brushed past the butler and strode down the hallway. The silence of the manor was no longer peaceful. It was mocking him. When he reached the drawing room, he paused at the door, his hand on the brass knob. He heard voices. Thought I was hallucinating, Arthur's voice was saying, warm and amused. I looked out my window this morning and saw the flag raised over Calverton. I told my mother, it cannot be. The Ice Duke never comes north. And yet, here you are. Here I am, Clara's voice replied. It was different from the voice she used with Sebastian. It was lighter. There was breath in it. We needed a change of air. And you brought the London rain with you, I see. I think the rain follows me, Arthur. Sebastian threw the door open. The scene before him was innocent enough, yet it made his teeth ache. Clara was sitting on the sofa, a teacup in her hand. She was wearing a high-necked dress of dark blue wool, modest and severe, yet she looked softer than she had in months. Sitting opposite her, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, was Arthur Stirling. He was not in uniform today. He wore the casual tweed of a country gentleman, which only made him look more at ease, more at home. They both turned as Sebastian entered. The smile on Clara's face vanished instantly, replaced by the mask of polite indifference she reserved for her husband. Your Grace. Arthur stood up, bowing easily. Welcome to Yorkshire. I must apologize for the intrusion, but when I saw the neighbours had arrived, I couldn't resist. Captain, Sebastian said, walking into the room like he was inspecting the troops. He did not offer his hand. I was not aware this was your home. Born and bred, Arthur said cheerfully. I am on leave until the spring, trying to get the estate back in order after the war. It seems we are destined to be in each other's pockets, Your Grace. It seems so, Sebastian said coldly. He moved to stand behind Clara's sofa, placing a hand on the backrest. It was a territorial gesture, stiff and awkward. We came here for solitude, Captain. My wife has been unwell. The city did not agree with her nerves. Clara stiffened. She set her cup down with a sharp clink. My nerves are excellent, Sebastian. It was my patience that was tested. Arthur's eyes danced with amusement, but he diplomatically ignored the barb. Well, solitude is in ample supply here, but if you tire of the moors, Oakwood has a decent library. In fact, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, leather-bound book. I brought this for you, Clara. You mentioned at the ball that you were suffering through bad poetry. This is Byron, The Corsair, just published. It's scandalous, brooding, and romantic. I thought it might suit your current setting. Clara's face lit up. She reached for the book as if it were a diamond. Byron. I have been trying to get a copy for months, but the booksellers in London were always sold out. I have my sources, Arthur winked. Thank you, she said, running her hand over the cover. She looked up at him, and for a moment, Sebastian ceased to exist. This is incredibly thoughtful, Arthur. It is a book, Sebastian interrupted, his voice dripping with disdain. We have a library full of them. You have a library full of law texts and agricultural reports, Sebastian, Clara corrected without looking at him. There hasn't been a poem in this house since the Tudors. We read for edification, not for sensation, Sebastian countered. Then I shall read this one in secret, Clara said, clutching the book to her chest. Like a contraband sweet. Arthur laughed. Enjoy it. And please, if you need anything at all, Oakwood is only a 2-mile ride across the valley. The path is rough, but the welcome is warm." He bowed to Clara, then nodded to Sebastian. "Your Grace, I will leave you to your peace." He left. The room seemed to grow darker and colder with his departure. Sebastian stared at the door, then looked down at his wife. She was already opening the book, her eyes scanning the first page with a hunger he had never seen her direct at him. "You knew," Sebastian accused. Clara didn't look up. "Knew what?" "That he lived here. That is why you didn't fight me when I ordered us to leave London. You knew we were coming to him." Clara finally looked up. Her grey eyes were weary. "You give yourself too much credit, Sebastian, and you give me too little. I didn't know. How could I? I haven't seen Arthur in 6 years, but I admit, it is a delicious irony. You ran hundreds of miles to escape a shadow, and you ran straight into the man himself. Give me the book," Sebastian demanded, holding out his hand. "No, Clara, I will not have you accepting gifts from—" "It is a book of poems, Sebastian. Not a diamond necklace. It is worth 5 shillings. She stood up, hugging the volume. "And it is the first gift anyone has given me in this marriage that wasn't intended to buy my silence. I am keeping it." And she walked past him, her skirts brushing his legs. "I am going to read. Do not disturb me." Sebastian stood alone in the drawing room. He looked at his hand, the one he had reached out. It was empty. He curled it into a fist. The days that followed were a study in tension. The weather closed in, trapping them in the house with the wind howling against the stones. They ate dinner in silence at opposite ends of a table long enough to seat 20. Sebastian tried to work. He buried himself in the estate ledgers, determined to find solace in numbers. But even there, he found Clara. She was everywhere. Not physically. She spent her days walking the moors or reading in her room. But her influence was seeping into the stone. On the 4th day, Sebastian was riding the perimeter of the estate. He came across a tenant farmer, a man named MacGregor, who was busy repairing a dry stone wall that had collapsed during a storm. "Morning, Your Grace," MacGregor said, touching his cap. He looked cheerful for a man knee-deep in mud. "MacGregor," Sebastian nodded. "I see you are fixing the breach. I was going to send the steward to assess it." "No need, Your Grace. Her Grace was here yesterday." Sebastian pulled his horse up short. "The Duchess? Here?" "Aye, she came walking by, saw the sheep getting out. She looked at the wall, saw how the water was pooling behind it, and told me to dig a trench to divert the runoff before building it back up. Said the hydraulic pressure was pushing the stones out." MacGregor chuckled. "She was right too. Smart woman, your wife. Knows her land." Sebastian stared at the farmer. Clara had been here, standing in the mud, discussing hydraulic pressure. "She speaks to you?" Sebastian asked. "Oh, aye. Asked about the children too. Sent down a basket of apples from the cellar for the little ones." Sebastian felt a strange pang in his chest. It was a mixture of pride and exclusion. She was managing his estate, caring for his people, and she hadn't said a word to him about it. She was building a life here, a role for herself, that completely excluded him. "Carry on, MacGregor," Sebastian muttered, spurring his horse. That night at dinner, the silence was broken by the arrival of a note. Higgins brought it to Sebastian on a silver tray. "From Oakwood Hall, sir." Sebastian snatched it. He recognized the handwriting. "To the Duke and Duchess. My mother insists on a neighbourly dinner. We shall expect you on Friday. No excuses accepted. The pheasant is already hung. Sterling." Sebastian crumbled the note. "We are not going." Clara looked up from her soup. "I have already replied. I said yes." "You what?" "I sent a reply this afternoon. I met Arthur on the road while I was walking." "You were walking with him?" "I was walking. He was riding. We spoke for 5 minutes." Clara took a sip of wine. "We are going, Sebastian. It would be incredibly rude to refuse. And frankly, I am bored to tears looking at these stone walls. I would like to see a different set of stone walls for an evening. I forbid it." "Then I shall go alone," Clara said calmly. "And everyone will wonder why the Duke is too afraid to dine with his neighbours. They will say you are hiding. Is that what you want? To be known as the coward of the county." Sebastian slammed his hand on the table. The silverware jumped. I am not a coward. Then put on your coat on Friday and eat the pheasant. Friday came. The dinner at Oakwood Hall was a torture designed specifically for Sebastian Vane. The house was smaller than Calverton, warmer, and cluttered with the debris of a living family. There were dogs by the fire. There were riding crops on the tables. It felt cozy. It felt like a home. Mrs. Sterling was a chatterbox who spent the entire first course asking Sebastian about London fashions he knew nothing about. Arthur sat across from Clara. They were speaking in a shorthand that infuriated Sebastian. References to books, to local landmarks, to shared memories of Sussex before the ruin. I saw MacGregor's wall, Arthur said, buttering a roll. He tells me you are a better engineer than the Royal Army Corps, Clara. Clara smiled. That real, soft smile. It was just common sense. Water is heavy. You have to give it somewhere to go. Most duchesses would not know that, Arthur said. Most duchesses think walls build themselves. Most duchesses have not had to manage a failing estate with zero funds, Clara said, her voice dropping. And you have done wonders here already, Arthur continued, turning to Sebastian. You are a lucky man, Your Grace. My tenants are asking if they can defect to Calverton. They say the new mistress actually listens to them. Sebastian gripped his fork. He felt like an intruder at his own table. He hadn't known about the wall until MacGregor told him. He hadn't known Clara understood drainage. He realized, with a sickening jolt, that this stranger, this soldier, knew his wife better than he did. Clara is efficient, Sebastian said stiffly. She is brilliant, Arthur corrected. And she is wasted on ledgers. The challenge was in the air, sharp as a blade. You don't appreciate her, Arthur was saying. But I do. Sebastian drank his wine too quickly. He needed to do something. He needed to prove that he knew her, that he could provide for her in ways this country squire could not. He looked at Clara. She was wearing the grey dress again, but she had pinned a sprig of heather to her bodice. A touch of the wild. He had an idea. The next morning, Sebastian rode out early. He went to the finest breeder in the county, a man known for his hunters. I want the best horse you have, Sebastian demanded. A mare. Something spirited, something magnificent. I have a purebred Arabian mix, the breeder said. Fast as the wind. A bit flighty, but beautiful. Perfect. I'll take her. He paid an exorbitant sum. He had the horse groomed until its coat shone like black satin. He bought a new saddle, embossed with the ducal crest. He led the horse back to Calverton himself. He felt a surge of confidence. Sterling gave her a 5-shilling book. Well, he was giving her a 200-guinea horse. He would show her who valued her. He would show her that he could be generous. He found Clara in the garden, pruning a rosebush that had been neglected for years. She was wearing thick gloves and an old bonnet. Clara, he called out. She turned, shielding her eyes from the weak sun. I have something for you, he said. He signalled to the stable boy, who led the black mare forward. The horse tossed its head, dancing on its hooves, looking wild and dangerous. There, Sebastian said, gesturing grandly. She is yours. Her name is Midnight. Clara dropped her shears. She stared at the horse. She didn't move forward. She took a step back. A horse? She asked. The finest hunter in Yorkshire, Sebastian beamed. I know you have been walking the moors, but a duchess should ride. She is fast, Clara. You can outrun the wind on her. Clara looked at the animal. The horse snorted and reared slightly, its eyes rolling. It was a creature of power and nervous energy. Clara looked at Sebastian. Her expression was not joy. It was confusion and disappointment. Sebastian, she said quietly, I don't ride. Sebastian's smile faltered. What? I don't ride, she repeated. I mean, I can sit on a pony if I must, but I hate it. I have always hated it. I am afraid of them. When I was 10, I was thrown. I haven't galloped since. Sebastian stood frozen. The wind whistled through the garden. The horse stamped its foot, impatient. But, Sebastian stammered. Sterling said, he said you were out on the moors. I thought, I walk, Clara said. I like to feel the ground. I like to stop and look at the moss and the heather. You cannot see anything from the back of a galloping horse, Sebastian. You just see a blur. She looked at the magnificent, terrifying beast he had bought. It is a beautiful animal, she said politely, but I cannot ride her. You should keep her for yourself. Sebastian felt the humiliation burn up his neck. He had tried. He had tried to make a grand gesture. He had tried to compete, and he had failed spectacularly because he didn't know the first thing about the woman he had married. He had bought her a creature of speed and fear when she was a creature of earth and stillness. I didn't know, he whispered. No, Clara said, picking up her shears. You didn't ask. She turned back to her roses. Arthur brought me a book, she said, her voice conversational, as if she weren't twisting a knife in his gut. Because he remembers that I used to read in the hayloft while he and my brothers were riding. He remembers me. She snipped a dead branch. Snip. Thank you for the thought, Sebastian. But please take it away before it tramples my roses. Sebastian signaled the boy to take the horse. He watched the animal be led away, its hooves clattering on the stone, the sound of his expensive mistake. He looked at Clara's back. She was working methodically, restoring order to the garden. She didn't look at him. He realized then, with a cold, sinking terror, that the distance between them wasn't something that could be bridged by a carriage ride to Yorkshire. It wasn't something that could be fixed with money or gifts. He had made her invisible for so long that he had lost the ability to see her, even when he tried. And now, another man, a man with no title, no fortune, just a memory and a book, was seeing her perfectly. Sebastian walked back into the house, feeling smaller than he ever had in his life. He went to the library, but for the first time, the silence didn't bring him peace. It just sounded like loneliness. He sat at his desk and looked at the wall. He was the Duke of Calverton. He owned thousands of acres. He commanded respect in Parliament. But in his own garden, he was a stranger. And across the valley, in a warm house full of dogs and poetry, the enemy was waiting. And the enemy knew his wife's favourite poet, and her fears, and her heart. I am losing her, Sebastian whispered to the empty room. The realization was not a spark of anger this time. It was a heavy, suffocating weight. He was losing her, and he had no idea how to stop it, because to stop it, he would have to become someone else. He would have to become a man who could speak and feel and ask. And Sebastian Vane didn't know if that man existed anymore. Outside, the wind picked up, howling around the eaves of the manor, promising a storm. But the storm inside Sebastian was already raging, silent and devastating. He pulled a ledger towards him, opened it, and stared at the numbers. They swam before his eyes. For the first time in his life, the numbers didn't make sense. The balance was off. And he was the one in debt. The storm did not arrive with a whisper. It arrived with a scream. The sky over Yorkshire turned a bruised, violent purple shortly after noon, and by 2 o'clock, the heavens had opened up with a ferocity that made the stone walls of Calverton Manor tremble. It was not merely rain. It was a deluge, a curtain of water so thick it obscured the view of the valley completely, turning the world into a grey, watery void. Inside the manor, the fires smoked as the wind drove the draught back down the chimneys. Sebastian sat in his library, attempting to read a report on sheep shearing, but the words swam before his eyes. The noise was deafening, the rattling of the casements, the howling of the gale in the eaves. It felt apocalyptic. He rang the bell for tea, needing a distraction. When the footman appeared, the man looked pale. "Where is Her Grace?" Sebastian asked, more out of habit than a desire for conversation. He hadn't seen Clara since breakfast, where she had eaten in silence, reading her book of poetry while he stared at his eggs. "Her Grace went out, sir," the footman said nervously. Sebastian froze, his hand hovering over the page. "Out. In this. She left before the worst of it started, Your Grace. About 2 hours ago. She was concerned about the tenants in the hollow, the Garth family. She said their roof was thatch and wouldn't hold under a heavy load. She took a basket of supplies and said she would help them tarp it. Sebastian stood up slowly, the chair scraping against the floor. The Garth cottage is across the river. Yes, sir. She took the lower path across the wooden bridge. Sebastian looked at the window. The rain was lashing against the glass with the force of gravel. The river, the Calver, which ran through the valley, was a docile stream in summer. But in a storm like this, fed by the runoff from the high moors, it turned into a torrent. And the lower bridge. The lower bridge was old. He had meant to repair it next spring. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through his chest. It wasn't the annoyance he had felt in London. It wasn't the jealousy he had felt at the ball. This was primal terror. It was the sudden, sickening realization that the world was fragile and could be broken in an instant. "Get my horse," Sebastian ordered, his voice cracking. "Sir?" The footman blinked. "The weather is—" "Get my horse," Sebastian roared, slamming his hand onto the desk. "And bring lanterns, now!" He didn't wait for the servant. He ran into the hall, grabbing his heavy oilskin coat. He didn't bother with a hat. The wind would have taken it in seconds. He shoved his feet into his boots, his hands shaking so badly he could barely fasten the buckles. Clara was out there. Clara, who hated horses. Clara, who walked because she wanted to see the moss. Clara, who was currently on the wrong side of a river that was rising by the minute. He burst out of the house and into the stable yard. The wind hit him like a physical blow, nearly knocking him off his feet. The rain was freezing, stinging his face like needles. The groom was struggling to saddle Titan, Sebastian's massive warhorse, the only animal strong enough to fight this wind. Sebastian mounted in one fluid motion, not waiting for the stirrups to be adjusted. He dug his heels in, and the horse surged forward into the grey maelstrom. The ride down the valley was a nightmare. The path had turned into a river of mud. The wind howled in his ears, sounding like human screams. Every dark shape in the mist looked like a body. Every broken branch looked like a disaster. "She is fine," he told himself, the mantra repeating in his head with the rhythm of the hooves. "She is sensible. She is efficient. She would have stayed at the cottage." But he knew Clara. She was stubborn. She wouldn't want to be trapped. She would try to come back. He reached the turn in the road that overlooked the valley floor. He looked down towards the river. His heart stopped. The river was a churning, brown monster, swollen thrice its size, tearing at the banks. And where the wooden bridge had stood, the bridge Clara had crossed hours ago, there was nothing. Just jagged splinters of timber sticking out of the raging water. "Clara!" he screamed, but the wind tore the name from his lips and swallowed it whole. She was trapped on the other side, or worse. She could have been on the bridge when it went. She could be in that water. He forced the horse down the muddy slope, sliding and stumbling. He had to get across. The stone bridge was 5 miles upstream. That would take too long. He had to cross here. He reached the bank. The noise of the water was deafening, a roar that vibrated in his chest. He scanned the opposite side, his eyes burning from the rain. There, a flash of grey against the dark heather. She was there. Not in the water, thank God. She was standing on the far bank, huddled under a tree, staring at the wreckage of the bridge. She looked small, fragile, a grey speck in a world of violent motion. She saw him. She waved her arm, a frantic, jerky motion. He couldn't hear her, but he saw her mouth move. "Go back." He ignored her. He couldn't leave her there. The temperature was dropping. Night was coming. If she stayed out here, soaked and freezing, the hypothermia would kill her before morning. He looked at the river. There was a ford about 100 yards downstream, a place where the water was usually shallow over a bed of flat rocks. It would be deep now, dangerous, but it was the only chance. He spurred Titan towards the ford. The horse balked, sensing the danger. "Go on!" Sebastian shouted, kicking the animal's flanks. "For her! Go!" The horse plunged into the water. The cold was shocking. It soaked through his boots instantly. The current grabbed the horse, shoving them sideways. Titan stumbled on the shifting rocks. For a terrifying second, Sebastian thought they would go under, swept away by the brown flood. He clung to the mane, shouting encouragement, using every ounce of his strength to keep the animal's head up. They fought the current for what felt like an hour, though it was only minutes. Finally, the horse's hooves found purchase on the mud of the far bank. They scrambled up, wet, shivering, and alive. Sebastian didn't stop. He galloped towards the tree where Clara was standing. She ran to meet him. She was soaked to the bone, her bonnet gone, her hair plastered to her skull. Her face was blue-white, her lips trembling violently. He vaulted off the horse before it stopped moving. He grabbed her. "You fool!" he shouted, shaking her. "You absolute fool!" He wasn't angry. He was hysterical with relief. He pulled her into his chest, crushing her against his wet coat, burying his face in her freezing neck. He needed to feel that she was solid. He needed to know she wasn't a ghost. Clara clung to him, her teeth chattering so hard she couldn't speak. She felt like a block of ice. "We have to move," Sebastian gasped, pulling back. "We can't ride back across. The water is rising too fast. We need shelter. The shepherd's hut," Clara stuttered, pointing up the slope towards the rocky outcrop. "Up there." It was a small stone structure, used by shepherds during lambing season. It was primitive, but it had a roof and 4 walls. Sebastian lifted her onto the horse, then climbed up behind her. He wrapped his arms around her, trying to shield her from the wind with his own body. They rode up the slope, the mud sucking at the horse's hooves. They reached the hut. Sebastian kicked the door open. It was dry inside, smelling of old hay and sheep wool. He lifted Clara down and carried her inside, kicking the door shut against the storm. The sudden silence was jarring. The wind still howled, but it was muffled now. "You're freezing," he said, his voice shaking. He set her down on the pile of dry hay in the corner. "We need to get these wet clothes off. Now, or you'll die." Clara nodded weakly. Her fingers were too numb to work the buttons of her habit. Sebastian batted her hands away. "Let me." There was nothing sexual in his touch. It was the frantic efficiency of a medic. He unbuttoned her sodden jacket, peeling the heavy wet wool from her body. He unlaced her boots. He stripped her down to her chemise, which was damp but not soaked like the outer layers. He stripped off his own coat, his jacket, his waistcoat, throwing the wet pile into the corner. He was left in his shirt and breeches, shivering in the damp air. "Come here," he commanded. He sat down in the hay and pulled her into his lap. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her back against his chest, curling his body around hers to maximize the contact. He was a furnace compared to her. I'm sorry," Clara whispered, her voice barely audible. "The roof, the garths." "Hush," Sebastian said, rubbing her arms vigorously to generate heat. "Do not speak of roofs. You almost killed yourself. The bridge, it just vanished." She shuddered, a spasm that went through her entire frame. "I thought I would be left there. I would have swum if I had to," Sebastian murmured into her hair. They sat like that for a long time, the only sound the wind outside and the ragged breathing of the 2 people inside. Slowly, painfully, the warmth began to return to Clara's limbs. The violent shivering subsided into intermittent tremors. Sebastian rested his chin on the top of her head. He closed his eyes. The terror was fading, leaving behind a raw, aching vulnerability. He felt exposed. He had ridden into a flood for her. He had lost his mind with fear. The wall he had built, the wall of indifference, of the invisible rule, had not just cracked. It had been washed away by the river. "Why did you come?" Clara asked softly. She wasn't looking at him. She was staring at the stone wall opposite. "You could have sent the grooms." "The grooms wouldn't have made it," Sebastian said. "Why did you come?" she repeated. "You hate chaos. You hate danger. You hate feeling anything." Sebastian tightened his arms around her. He could lie. He could say it was his duty as a husband. He could say he couldn't afford the scandal of a drowned Duchess. But he was too tired to lie. And holding her here, in the dark, with the storm raging outside, the truth felt like the only thing left. "Because I was terrified," he admitted. The words tasted like ash. When they told me you were gone. When I saw the bridge. He paused, swallowing the lump in his throat. I made you invisible, Clara, because visibility is dangerous. Clara shifted slightly, turning her head so she could see his profile in the dim light. What do you mean? Sebastian looked at the stone wall, but he was seeing the past. He was seeing a grand house in London, filled with shouting and tears. My mother, he said, his voice low and distant. She was vibrant, like you. She needed to be seen. She needed to be adored. She filled every room she entered. She was the most visible woman in England. Clara stayed silent, listening. He had never spoken of his mother. She loved my father, I think, in her own way, Sebastian continued. But she loved the attention more. She had affairs, public ones. She created scandals that were discussed in every drawing room from here to Bath. And every time she did, she came home and cried and begged forgiveness, and my father, he forgave her. Every time. Because he adored her. Because he couldn't live without her light. He took a shaky breath, but it destroyed him. The shame, the volatility, the endless cycle of passion and betrayal. He withered away, Clara. He became a ghost in his own house long before he died. I watched him break. I watched love break him. He looked down at her then. His blue eyes were dark, haunted. I swore I would never be him, he whispered. I swore I would never give a woman that kind of power over me. I wanted peace. I wanted order. I wanted a wife who was a partner, a contract, a shadow, someone who could not hurt me. Clara felt the tears prick her eyes. It wasn't cruelty, it was trauma. He wasn't a monster. He was a frightened boy hiding in a fortress of ice. So, you chose me, she said softly, the plain, pragmatic spinster. I chose safety, Sebastian corrected. Or I thought I did. He brought a hand up to touch her cheek. His fingers were warm now. But you are not safe, Clara. You are the most dangerous thing I have ever known. When you wore that green dress, when you laughed with Sterling, I felt the chaos coming back. I felt the control slipping. And today, he shuddered. Today, when I saw that river, I realized that my fortress is made of glass, and you are holding a hammer. I am not your mother, Sebastian, Clara said firmly. She reached up and covered his hand with hers. I am not a scandal waiting to happen. I am not going to break you. You already have, he said, his voice breaking. I prefaced peace. I wanted silence. But the silence without you is just empty, and the peace is just loneliness. He leaned his forehead against hers. I told you that you were invisible because I didn't want to see you. Because if I saw you, if I really saw you, I knew I would fall. And I cannot survive falling again. You are already falling, Clara whispered. I know, he said. I am on the ground. He kissed her then. It wasn't like the kiss in London, angry and possessive. And it wasn't like the kiss in the hallway, desperate and panicked. It was slow. It was tender. It was a surrender. He kissed her as if she were made of porcelain, as if he were terrified he might shatter her. He kissed her with all the fear and the longing he had kept locked away for 6 months. Clara kissed him back. She felt the change in him. The ice had melted, but what was left was a raw, open wound. She pulled back slightly. She looked into his eyes. She saw the love there, yes, or the beginning of it. But she also saw the terror. He was loving her out of fear. Fear of death, fear of loss, fear of the storm. Sebastian, she said softly, stroking his jaw with her thumb. You found me. I will always find you, he vowed. But you are still afraid, she said. It wasn't an accusation. It was a sad observation. I am, he admitted. I am terrified. Then we are not safe yet, she said. She didn't pull away from his arms. She needed his warmth. She needed him to survive the night. But she didn't melt completely. She didn't offer him her soul just because he had saved her life. He had confessed his trauma, and she understood him now. She forgave him for the cruelty of the invisible rule. But understanding was not the same as healing. He had admitted he wanted her, but he had also admitted that wanting her felt like a torment. She couldn't build a marriage on his torment. She needed him to love her, not because he was afraid of losing her, but because he was happy to have her. "Hold me," she said quietly. "Just hold me. The storm will pass." "It will never pass," Sebastian murmured, burying his face in her hair again. "Not for me." They stayed huddled in the hay as the darkness fell completely. Outside, the river raged on, tearing at the land, reshaping the valley. Inside, the silence returned, but it was a different kind of silence. It wasn't the silence of two strangers ignoring each other. It was the silence of two people who had looked into the abyss together and were waiting to see if they would survive the climb out. Hours later, the sound of shouting cut through the wind. Lanterns bobbed in the darkness outside the hut. Voices called out. Higgins, the grooms, McGregor the tenant. They had come with ropes and a cart, navigating the upper path. "Your Grace! Your Grace!" Sebastian stirred. He looked at the door, then down at Clara. She was asleep in his arms, exhausted. He didn't want to move. He wanted to stay in this dirty, cold shepherd's hut forever, because in here, the truth was out, and she was safe in his arms. Out there, the world was waiting with its expectations and its rules, and its Captain Sterling's. "We are here!" Sebastian called out, his voice hoarse. The door opened. Light flooded the small space. Higgins stood there, looking like a drowned rat, his face collapsing in relief when he saw them. "Thank God!" the butler sobbed. "We feared the worst." Sebastian stood up, lifting Clara effortlessly. She woke, blinking in the harsh light. "The carriage is at the top of the ridge, Your Grace," Higgins said. "It will be a rough ride, but we can get you home." "Home," Sebastian repeated. He carried her out into the rain. It had lightened to a steady drizzle. The violence had passed, leaving behind a soaked, battered landscape. He placed her in the carriage and climbed in beside her. He wrapped a dry blanket around her shoulders. Clara looked at him. In the light of the carriage lantern, he looked older. His face was streaked with mud, his hair plastered to his forehead. He looked like a man who had been to war. "Thank you," she said softly. Sebastian looked at her hands, clutching the blanket. He wanted to take them. He wanted to beg her to promise she would never leave the house again. He wanted to lock her in a tower where no river and no rival could ever touch her. But he remembered his mother. He remembered the cage his father had built out of love and fear, and how it had become a coffin. He kept his hands on his knees. "You are safe now," he said. His voice was steady, but the distance was there again. Not the distance of indifference, but the distance of a man trying to protect himself from the fire he had just touched. Clara saw it. She felt the wall going back up, not as high as before, and made of glass instead of stone, but a wall nonetheless. He had saved her. He had confessed to her, but he hadn't changed. He was still the man who thought love was a weakness. She turned her head to look out the window at the dark, empty moors. "Yes," she whispered, "I am safe." But as the carriage rattled back towards the silent stone manor, Clara knew that safety was not enough. She had tasted the storm, and she didn't want to go back to being invisible. She didn't want to be the object of his fear. She wanted to be the object of his joy. And until Sebastian could look at her without seeing a ghost, they were still lost in the flood. The days that followed the storm brought a new kind of winter to Calverton Manor. It was not the cold of the wind or the rain, which had finally ceased, leaving the moors battered and sodden under a pale, watery sun. It was a cold generated entirely within the walls of the house, radiating from the master of the estate. Sebastian Vane had saved Clara's life. He had held her in the shepherd's hut, warmed her with his body, and confessed the deepest, most terrified parts of his soul. He had admitted that his indifference was a mask for fear, that his silence was a dam holding back a flood. For a few hours, in the darkness of that stone shelter, the walls had come down. But as soon as they crossed the threshold of the manor, the walls had not only returned, they had been fortified. Sebastian did not ignore her now. That would have been easier. The invisible rule was gone, replaced by something far more suffocating. Excessive paralytic formality. He treated her not like a wife, nor even like a ghost, but like a piece of infinitely fragile porcelain that had almost shattered and must now be kept in a velvet-lined box, untouched and unbothered. He did not retreat to his library to hide. Instead, he managed her recovery with the detached efficiency of a head nurse. He ordered the fires in the East Wing to be kept blazing day and night until the rooms were stifling. He vetted her meals, insisting on broths and invalid food, though Clara was ravenous and perfectly healthy. He forbade her from leaving the house, citing the dampness of the ground. "You must rest," he would say, standing at the foot of her chaise longue, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes fixed somewhere above her head. The doctor said the chill could settle in the lungs. "We must be vigilant." "I am fine, Sebastian," Clara would reply, closing her book. "I am not coughing. I have no fever. I am merely bored." "Boredom is safer than pneumonia," he would counter, his voice flat. "I have instructed Higgins to bring you whatever books you require. But you are not to go outside. The bridge is gone. The paths are treacherous." "I know the paths are treacherous," she said softly, looking at him, trying to catch his gaze. "We navigated them together." At the mention of the storm, Sebastian would flinch, a microscopic tightening of his jaw, and immediately retreat. "I have matters to attend to. Do not exert yourself." It was a rejection more painful than his previous silence. In the hut, he had been raw and real. Now he was ashamed of that vulnerability. He looked at her and saw the moment he had almost lost control, the moment he had admitted he was falling, and it terrified him. So he wrapped himself in protocol and wrapped her in cotton wool, creating a distance that was impossible to bridge. He was protecting himself from the pain of caring, and he was punishing himself for the weakness of feeling. Clara watched him go, day after day, and felt a slow, heavy stone settle in her heart. She realized that saving her life had not healed him. It had only confirmed his worst fears, that caring for someone meant exposing oneself to the terror of loss. He had chosen safety again. He had chosen the ice. For Clara, this was the breaking point. She could endure his indifference. She had bargained for it. She could endure his anger. She had fought it. But she could not endure this hollow pantomime of care, this marriage where she was a patient and he was a frightened warden. She had tasted the truth of him, and she could not go back to the lie. The tipping point arrived on a Thursday morning, along with the post from London. The roads had finally cleared enough for the mail coach to get through. Higgins brought a silver tray to the morning room, where Clara was sitting by the fire, pretending to embroider while staring out at the grey hills. "Letters, Your Grace," Higgins said. "Two for you." Clara picked them up. The first was on heavy, legal parchment. The return address was Finch and Associates, Solicitors. The second was on scented lavender paper, covered in a looping, joyful script. Emily. Clara's heart skipped a beat. She opened the lawyer's letter first. Her hands trembled slightly as she broke the wax seal. "Your Grace, it is my pleasure to inform you that the final transfer of funds has been completed as per the terms of the marriage settlement. The trust for Miss Emily Melford is now fully capitalized and irrevocable. The trustees have been appointed, and the yield is exceeding projections. Furthermore, I have received confirmation that the dowry portion has been released to secure Miss Melford's engagement, as requested. We remain your humble servants," etc. Clara let out a breath she felt she had been holding for 6 months. It was done. The money was safe. Her father couldn't touch it. The gambling debts, the ruin, the fear of poverty. It was all walled off behind ironclad legal protections. She opened Emily's letter next. "Dearest Clara, I can barely hold the pen. He proposed. Mr. Thomas Pembury, you remember him, the one with the kind eyes and the estate in Derbyshire. He asked Papa for my hand last week, and because of the dowry you secured for me, you are my fairy godmother, Clara, I swear it. Papa agreed instantly. Thomas is wonderful. He is kind, he reads novels, and he does not gamble. We are to be married in the spring. I wish you were here to help me choose silks, but I know you are happy in your grand castle with your duke. I am so happy, Clara. I am safe. I love you. Emily. Clara lowered the letter. Tears pricked her eyes, hot and fast. But they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of pure, unadulterated relief. Emily was safe. She was marrying a good man. She would never know the terror of the bailiffs pounding on the door. She would never have to sell herself to a stranger to save her family. The mission was accomplished. Clara looked around the room. She looked at the heavy velvet drapes, the expensive furniture, the gilded cage she had inhabited for half a year. She had come here for Emily. She had endured the humiliation of the auction block, the coldness of the wedding night, the loneliness of the London house, and the exile to Yorkshire, all for Emily. She had been a soldier in a war for her sister's future. But the war was over. The treaty was signed. The victory was won. And suddenly, the realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. I do not have to be here. She was not bound by love. Sebastian had made it clear he was too afraid to love her. She was not bound by duty. Her duty to her family was discharged. She was 26 years old. She was intelligent. She was capable. And she was currently rotting in a stone house with a man who looked at her and saw only his own potential destruction. She stood up. The embroidery hoop slid from her lap and clattered onto the floor. She did not need a sign. She did not need permission. The knowledge settled over her like a calm, clear dawn. She was done. She had paid her price. She had fulfilled her end of the bargain. She walked to the window. The sky was still grey, but in the distance, towards the north, there was a break in the clouds. Scotland. Her Aunt Agatha lived in the Highlands near Inverness, a widow, eccentric and fierce, who had always told Clara, "If that fool father of yours ever ruins you, come to me. I have a cottage, a library, and no patience for men." It had been a fantasy, a daydream Clara used to survive the darkest nights in London. But now, looking at the road winding north, it didn't look like a fantasy. It looked like a destination. She turned from the window. Her movements were steady, precise. She went to her writing desk. She took out 2 sheets of paper. The first letter was the easier one. It was to Captain Arthur Stirling. She dipped the pen in the ink. She thought of his warm brown eyes, his laughter, the way he had defended her at the ball. He offered warmth. He offered validation. He offered a life where she would be seen and adored. But she knew, with a sudden, sharp clarity, that going to him would be a mistake. She would be jumping from one dependency to another. She would be the Duke's runaway wife, seeking shelter in the arms of a lover. She would still be defined by the men around her. She needed to be Clara Melford again. She needed to heal. She needed to find out who she was when she wasn't saving her family or fighting her husband. Dear Arthur, thank you. That is the first and most important thing I must say. Thank you for seeing me when I felt invisible. Thank you for the book, and the dance, and the reminder that I am a woman of flesh and blood. I know what you offered at the dinner. I saw it in your eyes. You offered an escape. And God knows a part of me wants to run to Oakwood and let you hide me from the cold. But I cannot. I'm leaving Calverton today, but I'm not coming to you. I have spent my entire adult life living for others, for my father, for Emily, for the Duke. If I come to you now, I will be living for you. I need to live for myself, Arthur. I need to stand on my own 2 feet, on ground that belongs to no one else. Do not come after me. Let me go. You deserve a whole heart, and mine is currently in pieces. Perhaps one day, when I have put it back together, our paths will cross, but not now. Be happy. Read Byron, and know that you saved a part of me. Clara. She sanded the letter and sealed it. She felt a pang of regret, but it was outweighed by the strength of her resolve. Then she took the second sheet of paper. She stared at the blank white space. How did one say goodbye to a man who terrified himself out of loving you? How did one say goodbye to a husband who had saved your life and then locked you out of his? She didn't want to be cruel. She didn't want to list his faults. He knew them. He carried them like stones every day. She wanted to be clear. She wanted to be undeniable. Sebastian, by the time you read this, I will be gone. Do not waste your energy sending the grooms to look for me in the river. I have not fallen. I have flown. I received word from Mr. Finch today. Emily is secure. She is to be married. The trust is safe. My part of our contract is fulfilled. I sold you my hand to save my sister, and you paid the price. The transaction is complete. You saved my life in the storm. I will never forget that. In that hut, I saw the man you could be, the man who feels, who protects, who loves. But I also saw the terror in your eyes. You are afraid of that man, Sebastian. You are so afraid of becoming your father, of being destroyed by emotion, that you have chosen to be a statue instead. I cannot live with a statue, and I cannot live as a patient, tiptoeing around your fear, waiting for the crumbs of affection you might drop when your guard is down. You said you wanted peace. You said you wanted silence. You said I was the chaos that threatened your world. I am giving you what you asked for. I am removing the chaos. You have your house back. You have your order back. You have your safety. I am going to a place where I do not have to be invisible to be safe. I am going to find a life where I exist, fully and loudly, without apology. I do not hate you, Sebastian. I pity you, because you have a vast capacity for love, and you are using all your strength to strangle it. Goodbye, Clara. She did not sign it, your Duchess. She signed it, Clara. She folded the letter. Her hands were steady. She looked down at her left hand. The heavy gold band, the signet of the Calverton line, weighed down her finger. It felt foreign. It felt like a shackle. She pulled it off. It left a pale indentation on her skin, a ghost of a bind. She placed the ring on top of the letter, right in the center of the desk. The gold glinted in the dull light. She stood up and rang the bell. Sarah, her maid, appeared. The girl looked worried. The tension in the house had affected everyone. Your Grace. Sarah, Clara said, her voice brisk and practical. I need you to pack a small trunk. Only my plainest dresses, the wool ones, my sturdy boots, and my books. A trunk, ma'am? Is His Grace planning another trip? No, Clara said. His Grace is staying here. I am leaving. Sarah's eyes went wide. Leaving? Alone? I am going to visit my aunt in Scotland. It is a family emergency. It was a lie, but a necessary one to keep the servants from panicking before she was gone. I need you to have the stable master prepare the light carriage. Tell him I wish to leave at dawn tomorrow. Tell him it is the Duke's order. But surely His Grace will accompany you. His Grace is busy with the estate, Clara said firmly. Do not question me, Sarah. Just pack. The rest of the day was a blur of surreptitious preparation. Clara moved through the house like a spy. She avoided Sebastian. She took her dinner in her room, pleading a headache. It wasn't entirely a lie. Her head was pounding with the magnitude of what she was doing. She was a woman leaving her husband in 1814. It was scandalous. It was dangerous. If he wanted to, he could drag her back. The law was on his side. He owned her, essentially. But she was betting on Sebastian's nature. She was betting that his pride and his relief at having his peace restored would stop him from chasing her. He had run away from London to avoid a scene. Would he really chase a runaway wife across the border and create an even bigger one? She didn't think so. She hoped not. Night fell. The house went quiet. Clara sat by her window, dressed in her travelling clothes. She didn't sleep. She watched the moon rise over the moors, painting the heather in silver and black. She thought of the shepherd's hut. She thought of the way Sebastian had looked at her, the desperate, terrified love in his eyes. I am falling, he had said. Then fall, she thought. But you have to hit the ground yourself. I cannot catch you. At first light, the house began to stir. Clara picked up her small valise. Her trunk had been smuggled down the back stairs by a sympathetic footman she had helped with a family matter weeks ago. Loyalty, she had found, was a currency more valuable than gold. She walked to the desk one last time. The letter to Sebastian lay there, the ring sitting on top of it like a crown on a tomb. She touched the paper briefly. A final goodbye. She walked out of the room. She walked down the long, silent corridor of the East Wing. She passed the portrait of Sebastian's father in the hallway, a sad-eyed man who looked trapped in his frame. "I will not be you," she whispered to the painting. She slipped out the side door into the courtyard. The air was crisp and cold, smelling of damp earth and pine. The light carriage was waiting, the horse's breath misting in the dawn air. The driver looked sleepy and confused, but he had his orders. Clara climbed in. She didn't look back at the house. She didn't look at the window of Sebastian's bedroom, where he was likely sleeping, dreaming of his precious order. "To the North Road," she told the driver, "and don't stop." The carriage jolted forward. The wheels crunched on the gravel. As they cleared the gates of Calverton Manor and turned onto the open road, the sun began to break over the horizon. It was a pale, watery sun, but it was rising. Clara Melford took a deep breath of the cold morning air. It tasted of frost and heather. It tasted of freedom. She was a duchess no more. She was a wife no more. She was a woman on a road to Scotland, with no money of her own. No plan beyond a cottage in the Highlands, and a broken heart. But as the wind whipped past the carriage window, blowing away the cobwebs of the last 6 months, Clara smiled. It was a small, sad smile, but it was hers. "I exist," she whispered to the rhythm of the wheels. "I exist." Yorkshire, 1814. The silence in Calverton Manor was usually a heavy, suffocating thing, a blanket of wool and stone that muffled the life out of the air. But on the morning after Clara's departure, the silence was different. It was sharp. It was brittle. It felt like the hush before an execution. Sebastian Vane woke with a strange sensation of unease. He had slept poorly, his dreams haunted by the image of the river rising and the bridge collapsing. He dressed mechanically, his valet moving around him with the usual quiet efficiency. The routine was a comfort. The routine was the armour. He walked down the corridor of the East Wing to meet Clara for breakfast. It was part of his new protocol. Ensure she was eating, ensure she was resting, ensure she was safe. He reached her door and knocked. There was no answer. "Clara?" he called out. His voice echoed in the empty hallway. He knocked again, harder. Still nothing. A cold knot formed in his stomach. The same knot he had felt when the footman told him she had gone to the river. He tried the handle. It was unlocked. He pushed the door open. The room was cold. The fire in the grate had burned down to grey ash. The bed was made, the sheets smooth and undisturbed. It looked like a room in a museum, preserved and lifeless. Sebastian took a step inside. "Clara?" His eyes swept the room. The wardrobe door was slightly ajar. He walked over and pulled it open. Her dresses were there, the silks, the velvets, the emerald gown she had worn to the ball. But the hooks where her plain woolen walking dresses usually hung were empty. He turned to the writing desk. It was sitting there, catching the weak morning light. A folded piece of paper. And on top of it, a circle of gold. Sebastian stopped. He stared at the ring. It was the Calverton signet, the heavy gold band he had placed on her finger 6 months ago. It was the symbol of his protection, his name, his ownership. Seeing it there, abandoned on a piece of paper, felt more violent than if she had thrown it at his face. He walked to the desk, his legs feeling heavy, as if he were wading through water. He picked up the ring. It was cold. He picked up the letter. He read it. "I am not a scandal waiting to happen. You are afraid of that man, Sebastian. I cannot live with a statue. I do not hate you. I pity you." Sebastian read the words twice, then a third time. She was gone. And she hadn't gone to Arthur Sterling. She hadn't run into the arms of a lover to spite him. She hadn't created a scandal. She had simply opted out. She had looked at the life he offered, the safety, the wealth, the peace, and she had rejected it. She had chosen uncertainty and poverty over him. because he was a small man, because he was afraid. The letter crumpled in his fist. A sound tore out of his throat, a raw, animal noise of grief that shattered the carefully cultivated silence of the room. He had won. That was the terrible irony. He had achieved exactly what he set out to do. The chaos was gone. The threat to his heart was removed. He had his order. He had his safety. And looking around the empty, perfect room, Sebastian Vane realized that safety felt exactly like death. "No," he whispered. He looked at the ring in his hand. He thought of her walking out into the dawn, alone. He thought of the look in her eyes in the shepherd's hut, waiting for him to catch her, and him refusing to stretch out his hand. He had let her go because he was afraid of being like his father, but his father had died of a broken heart because he stayed. Sebastian was going to die of a frozen heart because he let her leave. He turned and ran. He didn't ring the bell. He didn't call for his valet. He sprinted down the hallway, past the portraits of his ancestors, past the ghosts of his fear. He burst into the main hall. "Higgins!" he roared. The butler appeared from the shadows, looking terrified. "Your Grace! My horse! Saddle Titan! Now!" "But Your Grace, the carriage!" "I don't have time for the carriage. Saddle the horse." Sebastian didn't wait for a coat. He ran out into the courtyard. The air was freezing, biting through his shirt, but he didn't feel it. He felt only the burning fire of adrenaline. She had a head start, hours, but she was in a light carriage, and the roads north were mud. Titan was a warhorse. Titan could run until his heart burst. The groom brought the horse out. Sebastian vaulted into the saddle. He didn't look like a duke. He looked like a madman, his hair wild, his eyes wide and desperate. "Which way?" he demanded of the gatekeeper. "North, Your Grace, towards the border." Sebastian dug his heels in. "Run!" Boom! The horse surged forward, thundering out of the gates. Sebastian leaned low over the animal's neck. He wasn't riding for duty. He wasn't riding to save his reputation. He was riding for his life. The road to Scotland was a scar across the landscape, winding through the desolate beauty of the Northumberland hills. The miles blurred into a grey streak of mud and stone. Sebastian rode hard, pushing the horse and himself to the limit. The wind tore at his clothes. The mud splattered his face. His muscles screamed with the effort, but his mind was singularly focused. Please let me catch her. Please let it not be too late. He thought of every moment he had wasted. The silence at breakfast, the separate rooms, the look on her face when he gave her the horse she hated. He had been so busy protecting himself from being hurt that he had hurt her in 1,000 small, precise ways. He had treated her like a problem to be solved, when she was the only thing in his life that made sense. He rode through the afternoon. The sun began to dip, casting long, bruised shadows across the moors. He passed a mail coach, shouting a question to the driver. "Aye," the driver called back. "Saw a light carriage about an hour ahead, moving slow near the border." An hour. Sebastian spurred the tired horse. "Come on, boy. One last push." The border was close. If she crossed it, if she reached her aunt in the Highlands, she would be gone. She would disappear into the mountains, and he knew Clara. She was stubborn enough to hide from him forever. He had to catch her before she crossed the line. The light was failing when he saw it. A small stone inn sitting by the roadside, smoke curling from its chimney. The Drover's Rest. It was the last stop before Scotland. And there, in the yard, was a light carriage. The horses were being changed. Sebastian felt a surge of relief so powerful it nearly unseated him. He pulled Titan up, the horse sliding in the mud as it came to a halt. The animal was blowing hard, its coat lathered with white foam. Sebastian slid from the saddle. His legs almost gave way. He was stiff, exhausted, and covered in filth. He didn't care. He walked towards the inn door. He didn't march. He didn't stomp. He walked with the heavy, desperate gait of a man who has nothing left to lose. He pushed the door open. The tap room was warm and smelled of ale and roasting meat. It was crowded with drovers and travellers. The noise died down instantly as they saw him. He must have looked a fright, a tall man in fine clothes that were ruined by mud, his face pale, his eyes burning. He scanned the room. There, in the corner, sitting at a small wooden table, was a woman in a grey wool dress. She had a book open in front of her, but she wasn't reading. She was staring into the fire, her expression guarded and sad. Clara. Sebastian took a breath. His heart was hammering against his ribs. He walked across the room. The silence in the inn was absolute. Every eye was on him. Clara sensed the change in the room. She turned her head slowly. When she saw him, her eyes went wide. She half rose from her chair, her hand going to her throat. "Sebastian!" He stopped a few feet from her table. He didn't loom over her. He didn't bark an order. He stood there, dripping water onto the floorboards, shaking with exhaustion. "Clara," he rasped. His voice was gone. "What are you doing here?" she whispered, looking at his muddy boots, his wild hair. You look ruined." "I am," he said simply. "I am ruined without you." Clara stared at him. This was not the Duke of Calverton. This was not the man of ice. This was a man who had ridden through hell. "Go home, Sebastian," she said, her voice trembling. "I told you. The contract is done. You are safe. Go back to your peace." "I don't want it," he said. "I tried. God help me. I tried to go back to the silence. I sat in that room this morning and I listened to it. And do you know what I heard?" Clara shook her head, tears filling her eyes. "I heard nothing," Sebastian said. "Just the sound of my own life wasting away." He took a step closer. The patrons of the inn were watching, rapt. This was better than any play. "You said I was afraid," Sebastian continued, his voice gaining strength. "You were right. I was terrified. I thought that if I let myself love you, I would become weak. I thought I would lose control. I thought the chaos would destroy me." "It will," Clara said, a tear sliding down her cheek. "Love is chaos, Sebastian. You cannot control it." "I know," he said. And then the Duke of Calverton did the unthinkable. In the middle of a dirty roadside inn, in front of a dozen strangers, he dropped to his knees. He didn't care about the mud on the floor. He didn't care about his dignity. He didn't care about his title. He knelt before his wife like a penitent sinner. Clara gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "Sebastian, get up. Please." "No," he said, looking up at her. His blue eyes were clear, stripped of all defenses. "Not until you hear me. I have spent my life building walls to keep the world out. But you walked right through them. You corrected my math. You argued with me in carriages. You saved my tenants. You wore a green dress that nearly stopped my heart." He reached out and took her hand. His grip was warm, desperate. "You wrote that you cannot live with a statue," he said softly. "Well, the statue is broken, Clara. You broke it, and I am glad. Sebastian, I prefer war with you to peace without you," he swore, the words ringing in the hush of the room. "I would rather fight with you every day. I would rather suffer the jealousy and the fear and the chaos than spend one more hour in that silent house alone. Make me visible, Clara, because I see you now. I see you." Clara looked down at him. She saw the mud on his knees. She saw the exhaustion in his face. But mostly, she saw the truth. He wasn't hiding anymore. He had ridden hundreds of miles to kneel in the dirt and beg for the chance to be hurt by her. That wasn't weakness. That was the greatest courage she had ever seen. "You are a fool," she whispered, a sob breaking in her throat. "I am your fool," he agreed. "If you will have me." Clara looked at his hand holding hers. She remembered the letter she had written. "I need to stand on my own 2 feet. I will not go back to being invisible," she said, her voice finding its steel. "I will not be a ghost in your house. If I come back, Sebastian, I come back as your equal. I will have a voice. I will manage the estates. I will read poetry at the table. And if we fight, we fight. But we do not hide." "Agreed," Sebastian said instantly. "Everything. Anything." "Sheena, no more hiding from the world," she added. "No more running to Yorkshire because you are afraid of a dance." "I will dance with you," he promised. I will dance with you until my legs fall off. I will wear green if you ask it." Clara laughed. It was a watery, shaky sound, but it was real. "I think black suits you better. Come home," he pleaded, squeezing her hand. "Please, Clara, let me be the husband you deserve." Clara looked at the door to the north. Scotland was so close. Freedom was so close. But looking at the man kneeling before her, she realized that freedom wasn't about being alone. Freedom was about being chosen, and he was choosing her, fully and completely, for the first time. She squeezed his hand back. "Stand up, Your Grace," she said softly. "You are ruining your breeches." Sebastian let out a breath that sounded like a prayer. He stood up, stiff and aching, but his eyes were shining. "Does that mean—" "It means I am not going to Scotland," Clara said. She picked up her book. "But you are driving the carriage back. I am tired of looking at the road." Sebastian laughed. It was a rusty sound, unused for years, but it filled the room. He pulled her into his arms, ignoring the audience, ignoring the mud. He kissed her, and this time there was no anger, no panic. There was only relief and a promise of a future that would be loud and messy and gloriously real. "Let's go home," he whispered against her lips. Epilogue. 1 year later. The library at Calverton Manor was no longer a sanctuary of silence. It was a place of industry and light. The heavy velvet curtains had been pulled back, letting the autumn sun stream across the oak floor. Sebastian sat at his massive desk, surrounded by papers. But he wasn't alone. Clara sat at a smaller desk drawn up right beside his, her own stack of ledgers vying for space with his parliamentary reports. They were working on a draft for a new tenant protection bill. "The clause regarding storm damage is still too vague," Clara said, tapping her quill against the parchment. "If we do not specify the landlord's obligation to repair structural failures within a month, they will use the loophole to delay." Sebastian looked over at her. He smiled, a genuine, easy expression that had become his default state. "You are ruthless, my dear. The House of Lords will hate it." "The House of Lords can complain all they want," Clara said, "but the tenants will survive the winter. That is the priority." "Agreed," Sebastian said, marking the change. "We shall make it mandatory." He watched her for a moment. She was wearing a dress of deep crimson wool, vibrant and bold. She was no longer the grey mouse. She was the heart of the estate, the brain behind his politics, and the centre of his world. A soft gurgling sound came from the corner of the room. They both turned. In a wooden cradle placed near the fire, a baby kicked his legs. Arthur Vane, the heir to the dukedom, was 3 months old. He had his father's dark hair and his mother's grey eyes. Sebastian stood up and walked to the cradle. He picked up his son, lifting him high. The baby laughed, a loud, delighted shriek that would have horrified the old Sebastian. "He has your lungs," Sebastian noted, settling the baby into the crook of his arm. "And your stubbornness," Clara added, smiling. The door opened, and Higgins entered. He didn't look terrified anymore. He looked resigned to the happy chaos that had overtaken the house. "Your Grace," Higgins said, "Mrs. Pembury has arrived." "Emily!" Clara jumped up, abandoning the tenant laws. Emily burst into the room a moment later, looking flushed and happy, dressed in the height of matronly fashion. She ran to Clara, embracing her. "Clara, you look wonderful. And where is my nephew?" Sebastian handed the baby over to his aunt. "Careful, Emily. He is practicing his parliamentary speeches. He is very loud. He is perfect," Emily cooed. "Oh, Clara, I have so much to tell you. Thomas is determined to breed spaniels. The house is overrun with puppies." "It sounds delightful," Clara laughed. "And," Emily lowered her voice conspiratorially, "I heard news from the neighbours. Captain Sterling has married." Sebastian stiffened slightly, an old reflex, but Clara met his eyes with a calm, amused smile. "Has he?" Clara asked. "Yes, a cousin from Sussex. Very pretty apparently, though not very bright. They say he is quite content." "I am glad," Clara said sincerely. "He deserves to be happy." She looked at Sebastian. The jealousy that used to consume him was gone, burned away by a year of absolute certainty. He knew who Clara belonged to. He knew who he belonged to. He sent a gift for the baby, Sebastian said, gesturing to the shelf. A silver rattle. It was appropriate. We shall write him a thank you note, Clara said. We shall, Sebastian agreed. Emily wandered off to the window with the baby, cooing at the view of the moors. Sebastian walked back to Clara. He sat on the edge of her desk, taking her hand. Are you happy? He asked quietly. It was a question he asked often, as if he still couldn't quite believe the answer. Clara looked at him. She looked at the work they were doing together. She looked at their son in Emily's arms. She looked at the man who had ridden through a flood and knelt in the mud to claim her. I am tired, she teased. This bill is exhausting, and your son kept me up half the night. But are you happy? He persisted. Clara squeezed his hand. I am visible, Sebastian. I am heard, and I am loved. Yes, he said, lifting her hand to kiss her fingers. You are. Then I am happy. She picked up her quill. Now, get off my desk, Your Grace. We have a law to pass before tea time. Sebastian laughed and went back to his chair. The silence of the house was gone, replaced by the scratching of pens, the babble of a baby, and the steady, rhythmic beating of two hearts that had finally learned to beat in time. It wasn't a peaceful house. It was a house full of life, and for the Duke of Calverton, that was better than peace. It was everything.